I can't decide whether I should do this now or later, but I think I need to begin with a word about pronouns. Not the pronouns that everybody is so exercised about right now, he, she, they. But I have a problem speaking to you all with first and second person pronouns. Because on the one hand, I've not been an active part of this congregation since 1986 when I was ordained in this sanctuary. And Frank Garcia was on that commission. Woo! And Leslie Ellison signed my certificate of ordination. So in one sense, when I speak to this congregation, you all are sort of second person plural, you're you. And yet I really have kind of been a part of this congregation since I was baptized right about here in 1963. And so a lot of times when I think about this congregation, I think of as we, as us. There will be a few times when I make reference to this congregation and I'm confused. Sometimes I will no doubt call you you, and sometimes I will call us us, and I mean exactly the same group of people, okay? I'm not trying to distinguish between whether I'm here in person or not. We're us, and I don't get to be here very often, but I love you to bits. At any rate, the story we just heard from John's Gospel, as many of you probably know, is the first miracle that we see Jesus perform after his baptism. He turns water into wine so that people can continue to party. Now, I know that's a little bit off topic, but I think it is important to remind ourselves at times when we start to imagine Jesus as always being terribly somber or serious or grim, that his first miracle, 3 days after his baptism, took place at a party, and it had the effect of encouraging the party to continue. Not our usual picture of Jesus, is it? I mean, if a stranger came up to you, or even a friend who wasn't much of a churchgoer, and out of the blue said, "Tell me something about Jesus," I'm betting the first words out of your mouth would not be "party animal." Certainly there is more to him than that, although I should have brought this visual aid with me. The church I served in Dallas, we discovered one time that the 5 letters in the word party are also found in the word Presbyterian. And so we actually had T-shirts made that said on the front, Trinity Presbyterian Church, and on the back, we put the party back in Presbyterian. Feel free, 75th anniversary. Sorry. Certainly, there is more than party-goer to Jesus. We all know that. But many churches are so uncomfortable with that first miracle that they insist Jesus didn't really turn water into wine. No. It was like sort of like an early version of Welch's. Non-alcoholic, of course. But that ain't what the Bible says. Anyway, the storyline is clear. Jesus has the caterers, I guess we'd call them, draw jugs of everyday water, probably from the same backyard well the family had been using for decades. And by the time those jugs get to the partygoers, they're jugs of wine. And not just any wine either, thank you very much. They are much better wine than the host himself had provided. Now, of course, the point of the story, and the reason John included it in his gospel, is not to prove to us that Jesus was a partygoer, although clearly he was. It might be more to the point that to suggest that the story got put in because it happened right after Jesus' baptism and was the first demonstration of his specialness, of his power that was not quite like anybody else. And that's partly true, but we also have to remember that as the story tells it, at least most of the people at the party never found out that it was Jesus who provided the wine. They assumed it was the host, who for some inexplicable reason saved the best wine for last. So not that many people found out about Jesus' powers through that particular miracle. I wonder if a related but different part behind the story is not simply John telling his readers or hearers that Christ has the power to turn something very ordinary into something extraordinary. Not just water into wine. I mean, if you're God, that's small potatoes. Because interfering in the course of nature is relatively easy if you're God. Nature doesn't resist you. What's truly miraculous is the possibility that Christ might be able to transform us. Us, ordinary, plain vanilla, tap water, well water kind of people, into something extraordinary. And I suspect that John is at least hinting at that as well, even if it might not have been his main reason for including the story. The difficulty, of course, is that we do resist being changed, don't we? Think about it like this. With winemaking, if you go through a normal process, not necessarily a miraculous one, but if you use grapes and the sugars and the fermentation, not a miracle of some kind, after a few months or years, you are going to get wine. Maybe good wine, it may be nasty wine, but it is wine. Whereas some human beings, on the other hand, never change. There are so many different ways that we can and do resist being transformed. Let's think about a few of those. I think at the very outset, a major obstacle for many of us is that we resist thinking of ourselves as ordinary, don't we? I don't want to be ordinary. We're not as common as water, especially plain old tap water or well water or muddy river water. We like to think of ourselves as more special than that. And we're all different from one another. Paul reminds us of that. We have different gifts, but it seems that often we take pains to deny our common humanity. Extreme example. Do you remember the first time you ever fell really goofy in love with somebody? And how you were quite sure that no two people on earth had ever felt quite the same way you two were feeling at that moment? Been there? I've been there. At the other end of the spectrum, it also happens in time of grief and loss, when our hurt feels so deep and we feel so alone that it just seems impossible that anyone else has ever lived through quite as much pain as we're having to live through. Some of us have been there too. We often like to think of ourselves as different from other people when it comes to sin. Well, my sin's not as bad as your sin kind of thing. Ever played that game with yourself? I may cheat on my taxes, but at least I didn't bankrupt my company and cost thousands of people their pensions. Okay, I'm a glutton. I eat way too much, but it's not nearly as bad as abusing drugs or other really bad things I could be putting into my body. Besides, food isn't illegal. It may be hard for us to accept the idea and the need for our own transformation if it means that we have to first acknowledge our ordinariness. And even when we can bring ourselves to do that, the next obstacle often seems to be that we don't want anyone's help in getting transformed. Admitting that we might be just plain a jug of water is hard enough, but how much more difficult it is to acknowledge that we need help from beyond ourselves if we ever want to be anything more than ordinary. We'd rather do it ourselves, thank you very much. Like the 3-year-old who wants to dress herself, thank you very much, and it comes out looking quite interesting. The deceptive thing about this argument we make with ourselves is that up to a point it works. We can change ourselves through effort, through willpower, through making different choices than we made in the past. We can lose weight or change jobs or start or end a relationship, move to a new city and start over. But we can't truly transform ourselves under our own power. It doesn't work. Not from water into wine, anyway. As far as we can get on our own is maybe like river water to bottled water, cleared of a few impurities. Or from ordinary water to Perrier with a little bit of fizz that we didn't have before. But water into wine, only Jesus can do that. And even if and when we do reach the point where we come to accept that we can't do it for ourselves, the last obstacle seems to be that we still want to hold on to some control. That is, we want to decide what it is we're going to get transformed into. We'd like to shape the outcome. We reach a point where perhaps where we're willing to say, okay, I'd like Jesus to transform me, but could you maybe make me into beer instead of wine? Or how about a really fine single malt scotch? How hard it is for us really to let God be in charge. I think that's why the metaphor of wine is a powerful one, because whether we're talking about spirits as in alcohol or the spirit, we're talking about not having total control of ourselves. Yeah, in the case of too much wine, that's not necessarily a good thing. But if we can imagine being filled that much with the Spirit of God, that's a wonderful thing. Yeah, it's scary, wonderful, both. Because unlike being drunk when you are oblivious to the fact that you're not in control, when we're transformed by the Spirit, we are very much aware that someone else is in control, not us. We don't get to set our own course. And from the point of view, from those of us who are still kind of ordinary water, that is scary to contemplate. I mean, given anyone, even God, that kind of control over us is a big change. It takes a while for us to get ready to accept. Our culture doesn't really want us to allow ourselves to let someone else steer us. I mean, I can recall at one point in my own journey, we're talking freshman year in college now, saying, okay, God, I give up. I'm not going to law school. Fine, you've persuaded me. You can make me into a minister if you really want to, but don't you dare ever say the word missionary to me. And you had better not ever send me to a church in Houston. Which is somewhat akin to saying to transform me from water into a grape knee-high. Okay, so that's my confession, right? I'm still working on it. But where are you? Are you water? Are you wine? Are you somewhere in between? See, this congregation is wine. It's one of the things I love about this place. Of course, you have absolutely spoiled me for ministry in any other congregation. But jointly, you're amazing. What at least historically, I think feels a little harder for many of us is that personal journey of transformation. There are so many out there in the wide world who think differently from us theologically and sometimes politically, who are big into let Jesus change you, that we're almost allergic to that. We're good at wanting to transform institutions and society. We're a little more scared about letting our individual selves be transformed. But that's part of our journey as well. I struggle with it. Some days I'm water, some days I'm wine. How about you? Water, wine, a wine cooler, maybe somewhere in between. Have you accepted your humanness, the ways in which you are, golly, just like the rest of us? Have you acknowledged your need for God? Have you made up your mind that you will accept God's plan for you no matter how weird it looks? Because there's a party going on and they need wine. And that's us. That's us together. It's us as individual persons as well. It is a tremendous responsibility, but it is also a whole lot of fun. May we have the grace to allow God to make us into wine for the world. Amen.